So I was thinking earlier, you're hearing from some speakers who really know what they're talking about, so my talk should be a change of pace. But part of the point of this talk is that I'm actually not a professional developer. I'm a writer, an editor, and because I write material about technology, I was interested in getting hands-on experience. I started playing around with my own plugins and software. At some point I tried to create my own content management system because how hard could it be? And eventually worked backwards to realizing that it was a lot easier to start with a good base and then add whatever flourishes on top. The main plugin that is most widely used that I work on is called RSVP Maker. There is a set of notes, code samples at the address you see on the screen. It's up there now, and I'll be adding to it after the talk, particularly after people point out to me things that I've done wrong. The first time I spoke at WordCamp was my first experience with being heckled on Twitter because I was giving what was supposed to be an introductory talk for plugin programmers, and people were saying it was not introductory enough. So just a level setting, and we've had some of this along the way. How many of you have either created a plugin, whether or not it's in the repository, but you've created a plugin, you've modified something in your functions PHP file? That's pretty much everybody in the room? Mm-hmm. Okay. How many of you would put yourself maybe in a similar state to me? You maybe didn't have a huge amount of formal training. You learned along the way. You learned to search through the codex. You found some good tutorials. You copied and pasted some code. And you tweaked it to get it to do what you wanted it to do. That's where I'm coming from. And Zach touched on this about the documentation, is you could get away, you could get a long distance with finding a good tutorial or two. You could Google practically any subject and you can find a tutorial, you can find a discussion on Stack Overflow that answers your question or at least points you in the right direction towards figuring out your own answer to the question. And with Gutenberg, we're not there yet. So I'm going to take you through sort of my struggles in updating this particular plugin and some related ones. And just to give you an idea, this is the process that you would go through. This is a little sandbox website. So off of rsvpmaker.com, you can click through the sandbox and play around. You can create a post. You can see all the standard, Gutenberg loveliness being used so that you can modify the properties of a piece of content. And I like the idea of every content type can have its own editor controls. That happens to be very useful in some of the plugins that I'm working on creating or enhancing. So what we did there is we created this post, we went back in and edited it a little bit more. Now we're adding pricing because this is supposed to be a dinner. So we have the early bird price, we have the higher price that if you wait longer and then register. And then when you click through, you get a confirmation message and there's a prompt to pay with a credit card. So it has Stripe integration and integration with a few other APIs. So what, that's the same thing, isn't it? This is more what RSVP Maker used to look like. And so in the classic editor, you would have your content and then you would scroll down and you have this big meta box underneath. And honestly, the meta box had gotten long and ugly and overly complicated and probably needed to be reworked anyway. But one of the things that changes with Gutenberg is they don't really want you using meta boxes. It doesn't mean that they will automatically break, but it's not as friendly to them. There are a couple of things that you would probably want to change if you're going from the older editions of WordPress If anything that sort of touches the editing experience, you're probably going to want to start phasing out your meta boxes and turning that into something that's displayed in a sidebar. And also, if you're using shortcodes, shortcodes still work under Gutenberg, but you're sort of not taking advantage of the power of Gutenberg if you're using shortcodes, because we have some nice ways of creating better user interface now. So there's another application that I built on top of RSVP Maker called WordPress for Toastmasters, and this is for the public speaking and leadership development group Toastmasters. The idea is that you can come in here, you can have a calendar of events, you can click through to a specific event, and you can sign up to take a role. So this is based on, you have to log into the site, and you can sign up to speak or to be one of the evaluators at the meeting, or one of the other supporting roles. So here I'm signing up to speak. I'll put in some information. And in a minute it will show you how you can then generate a printable agenda for your meeting. So we actually have a couple of different views of the same data. We have what you see when you go into the site and you're looking to sign up for roles. That's more of a form experience. And then we have this printable agenda. There's also a way that you can email that out so that people see what are the open roles that you need to fill. And that sort of approach could be taken for other things along these lines as well. And the way it used to work is I had a set of shortcodes. So an agenda for one of these meetings, instead of being text and images, would be a set of shortcodes. And then I found a way of sort of covering up the shortcodes so they could be represented by a placeholder image on the screen with some text over it. So you would basically just see a button in the editor saying speaker role, click here if you want to set the options. So I built a little bit of user interface. And this is really based on the same sort of technique that you would have if you ever look at the source code for, might have it, no, I don't have it here. I'll come back to that. If you ever looked at the source code for an image with a caption, the way it was inserted into a WordPress post, caption is actually a shortcode wrapped around that piece of content. Right? So when you clicked on, you didn't have to, nobody goes in and edits that shortcode manually. Normally you click on the image, you get a pop-up. So I found a smashing magazine article somewhere that explained how to do something like that. I was able to get it to work, but it was kind of a hack. And in the new version that is Gutenbergized, we have more these placeholders that fit within the framework of how you edit other content, and you click through and you would set your parameters for roles or directions on the agenda. So resources that you have available. Again, they're not at quite the stage of the developer's guide. I mean, you can, the searchable guide to functions, hooks, actions, filters has gotten pretty good, and it's at a state where people can come in and they add comments, they add source code examples. So there's a lot of good starting points for PHP code. Gutenberg's not at the same stage. The handbook is good, but sometimes it assumes that I know things that I don't know. It assumes more knowledge of React. So there's some people in the room who raise their hands that they're already working with React. God bless you. You got a heads up on the rest of us. But trying to understand even the documentation and how it fits together. Zach was talking about the data API and all this information you can get from it. And there's a page that lays out all those labels, all that input that you can put into the data API and get back a variable. But it doesn't really explain how it fits together, to my mind. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And also, what the heck is this? Okay, maybe somebody, a lot of people in the room already passed this. But what is this? It looks like a block. There's HTML in my JavaScript, right? And there should be quotation marks around it, right? It should be a string. But it's not a string. Now, the first time I came across some code like this, again, I was Googling around, I was looking at tutorials, so I copied and pasted this code into my jQuery, and I fed it directly into the browser, and of course it doesn't work. The browser doesn't understand this. So this is not legal JavaScript in the sense of being something that your browser understands. We have this whole compilation process. And compilation makes it sound like we're boiling something down to a binary. We're not doing that, but we're boiling it down into more fundamental JavaScript, minified and optimized. But you need to go through that process before this code is usable. And although it looks like HTML, it's not really HTML. And you can only use this in a return statement. This is JSX code. And what it actually is doing is it's being converted into a set of JavaScript objects on the fly. And we'll see how that gets boiled down in a minute. One thing that I ran into is that the documentation switches back and forth between showing things in this JSX format, which once you get the hang of it is actually fairly understandable, and using more basic JavaScript, the WordPress element, create div or whatever. So more basic, a little bit more arcane JavaScript is what you see in the code on the right there. And the tutorials on how to create a block, I think, are actually pretty good. We're getting to that point. But where I fell off the cliff was when I wanted to add something to the sidebar that was not part of the block. Particularly data that was associated with the post. It wasn't associated with any specific block on the page. So some of the tutorials on how to create a block talk about how to create the inspector component, inspector user interface that goes in the sidebar. But how do I, in RC Maker, because it's an event, we want to have a little calendar widget on the side. It is not the date of the post, not the date that it was updated on the website, but the date of the event, so that we can sort by event date. So what I'm showing here, we're in a special command prompt. I've installed Node.js on my computer, and this is working with a package called Create Gutenberg, which is kind of a shortcut to dealing with React and dealing with Gutenberg. So what it will do is I can create the skeleton for a block. And I can go into this mode where I say npm start. And what it's going to do is it's going to watch for updates to the code that I'm working with. It's going to generate a new version of it on the fly. I was at a talk yesterday about Webpack and how to use that. Create Gutenberg actually bundles in Webpack, bundles in a number of other utilities that are commonly used for creating this content. But it's giving us a shortcut. And what I'm trying to show you here is that when I changed the code there, I got an error. Because again, it looks like HTML, but it's not really HTML. And when I inserted an open div and there was no closed div, I got a runtime error exactly as if you had written a programming command or a function with an open bracket and no closed bracket. Okay? So, and this is what that reduced down to its basics code. So it's what? WP.element, create element, paragraph, null. It was created via the text. But you can see how these things are all chained together in a very compact form. So this is understandable to your computer, to your browser, not as understandable to humans. That's why JSX is nice. If you had to write this code manually, that would not be fun. That would be a lot less fun than figuring out all the rest of this. Let's see. What was I trying to show here? Oh, this is that demo block rendered. So this is actually a sample that comes with Create Gutenberg block without modification. So I wanted to show some other examples to kind of give you the essentials of how you would set up a block. And again, there are other tutorials that you can find on this. But this is the basic setup of the screen. I'm showing in the upper right-hand corner a little bit of CSS. So that's my style SCSS that's being included here. I'm pulling in a bunch of components from those WordPress libraries, from the editor, from the blocks, from components. I'm creating a component that's going to go in the sidebar that's going to be my inspector. And then the heart of the block is where we have a definition, we give it a name, a label, and all that. Then there's an edit function and a save function. And typically, these are both returning that JSX code. So one is returning the code that's going to be displayed in the editor. That's your representation in the editor. And as part of that return, we have the demo inspector, which was the component that's going to go in the sidebar. Then we have a definition of our custom block, and the block as it's going to be saved out. And just to see how that flows through, this is what that custom block looks like in the editor. And if you look at the source, what we have here is really just basic HTML. There's a comment at the beginning and a comment at the end of the block. And in the first comment, there's a space for some JSON code. So JSON encoded data associated with that block. So all this block does is it gives you an inspector field on the side that allows you to change the text of the message in the center there. And it displays it in the editor. One advantage of this actually is if that plugin was later deactivated, as long as this is basic HTML, it wouldn't render in the editor anymore, but it would still be served up to the end user just fine. So there's some advantages there, definitely as opposed to using shortcodes to generate more custom formatted content, which is kind of unnecessarily work for your web server. This is another example. These are a couple of friends of mine. They run a website called Geeks on Tour, and their business is they travel around the country in an RV. They give tutorials on technology for travelers. They also do a weekly YouTube live show, and this is the replay.
Next.
But what I was showing you there were the show notes underneath the video, where she has a block of explanation, and next to it she has the timestamp and the link. And those are linked to the specific timestamp on YouTube. So if you click on one of those, it takes you to the right place. Now, she used to do that in some Microsoft Word-based extension that would spit out HTML and pump it into WordPress. And I guess it stopped working when Gutenberg came out. Anyway, it was no longer supported code either. So we gave her her own custom block. This has been published as a plugin called My Marginalia. It just gives you a little editable field on the left where you can put in the timestamp, and then it's a wrapper around to allow you to insert multiple paragraphs on the right-hand side. So this is a style where, as part of your JSX, I'm using a component called inner blocks. The inner blocks allows you to create a block that wraps around other blocks. So in the edit function, I call inner blocks, and then in the save function, I call inner blocks.content, and it will output the content associated with that. So it's a way of wrapping things up. In RSVP Maker, there's also what I call the limited time block. So if you have something that you want to be displayed on your home page, but it should stop displaying after a certain date, you can set that date, and when the page is viewed, that gets checked, and it either will or will not be displayed. Eventually, you're going to want to go back in and clean that up, but I often see people advertising things that are long past because they never went in and went back and cleaned things up. Here's an example of something that took me a really long time to figure out how to do that was easy using the PHP framework, relatively easy, which was display a custom notice. So in the administration section, you can display your own notice on a certain event. I think one of the motivations of the Gutenberg team was to declutter the screen. Because a lot of plugin authors are popping up something, trying to get you to upgrade to the premium version. A lot of unnecessary reminders that are at least not relevant to the editing experience. But also, they just technically have changed the way that they handle notices on the editing page. It is a JavaScript-based method, where it used to be a PHP-based method. So the PHP-based method was add action, add minute notices, define your function, define the circumstances under which that data should be output, and then output the data. Fairly simple. It took me probably 3 months to find a JavaScript equivalent. And again, I couldn't find anybody who specifically answered the question of how do you make a notice appear on the Gutenberg screen after a post has been updated. My particular use case is the RSVP Maker plugin has templates. So the template is where you lay out that my group meets every Friday or the first Friday of the month at such and such a time, and boilerplate details. But when you save the template and you want to update the events that have been based on that template, or at least have the option of doing that, so we need a notification to the user to do that. I couldn't find this anywhere except searching through the GitHub repository. I eventually found how the event is triggered when Gutenberg saves post metadata. So there are several of those data select commands here, saving several variables, and then there's a bunch of logic that says if this, but not that, and also this, and not that. Basically, it's trying to make sure that it's not an autosave, it's not an extraneous event. And I know there were some issues when Gutenberg was under development that people were having performance problems because it was firing events, or I think it was saving metadata on the page every time there was an autosave, and that was causing problems. So they've got this boiled down. But it'd be nice if someday they got it to the point of a simpler function that had kind of some of that logic wrapped up into it, and I just have to call, I want to subscribe to has page updated, show my alert. So here is the alert. So when I change my template and save, we get, after updating, click this, and then it gives me the option to update the events based on that template. I also want to cover blocks versus shortcodes, because you can use Gutenberg blocks essentially as shortcodes, or in sort of the same way that you use shortcodes, except that now you have a more systematic way of providing a visual representation for those things in the editor. So, see, the bottom thing here is what I was trying to mention earlier. That's all the code that's wrapped around an image. So the shortcode is actually captioned, and we're modifying or wrapping the HTML that's returned around that content. And the top one is just a shortcode that doesn't have a close tag for it. It just has an attribute that's getting passed. And for those of you who haven't done this, you do add shortcode, my shortcode, so it's sort of like add action. You provide a function, and then you write your function that is going to do whatever processing and return some block of content. You can also have one that is a wrapper, like the caption one that I just showed you. So it takes in the attributes on the shortcode, but it also takes in the content. You do some extra processing and then return that content, or your modified version of that content. So we can do the same thing with a Gutenberg block that was going to be entirely server-based, and I have some of those. In the Gutenberg block save function, you return null. And when you return null, it just outputs the comment with a closure on it and whatever data is associated with that. So whatever attributes are associated with that. And on the server end, we have a registered block type. We associate that with our namespace / the name of our block. And then on the other side, I'm doing render callback, Toastmaster short, because in that example, I'm calling the exact same function I previously used with a shortcode. And then the function takes in the attributes, does whatever processing, and returns the content. One thing I actually have noticed with Gutenberg is sometimes you get sloppy and you do output screen instead of returning the content. You could get away with that with shortcodes some of the time, so that the formatting might be wrong. In Gutenberg, apparently some of that code is actually executing even when you're viewing it in the editor, and so that improper output will trigger problems with the editor. So I've seen errors associated with that. Escape from Gutenberg. So, as I mentioned, I had this long, involved form that previously appeared under the main content area in the classic editor. I have re-engineered some of that to be sidebar components, but it would take a long time to re-engineer all of it, and this is a spare time project for me. So what I've done instead, at least as a transitional thing, is I do have a calendar block, a calendar display for setting the date, and then there's some other code that's on site that apparently I'm not going to have time to get to, where we add something to the admin bar that allows you to click through to a separate screen to set that additional data that is associated with the post. So we're done?
Yes, we're out of time. You have a couple minutes of questions, like 2 minutes.
All right. Couple of questions. Yes.
When you register a Gutenberg block server side, I was looking at the code and it says your code match short function says things like get agenda content, get sign up button. Where does it come from? Like it has a period before that. I think it's probably the default function, right? Yeah.
What you think? What is the default function?
Like when you say if is agenda view content.
No, yeah, I mean it's a custom function.
Oh, it's a custom function.
And in fact, that was pseudocode. That
okay,
was
never
kind
mind.
of yeah. But somehow I need to detect whether something should be displayed as the form or for the agenda.
Okay.
That's all. Anything else? All right, I will go to the happiness bar and seek happiness.